Hello and welcome to Payments Unfiltered, powered by Primer. I'm your host, Theo Spirides, Head of Product at Primer. And today I'm joined by James Fry, Head of Enterprise Product at Worldpay, now Global Payments, where he leads the product strategy for the enterprise segment. In this conversation, we'll unpack the changing trends he's seeing with enterprise merchants, what's driving those shifts, but also some of the key industry themes that he's keeping his eye on. Let's dive into the conversation. All right, well, James, thanks so much for joining us. I think to start off, you've been in payments for over a decade, not to age you, but I'd love to hear your opinion on how merchants have changed their approach to payments over the last few years.
No, I think the biggest thing is, I think years and years ago, payments was seen as a bit of a commodity or like a vendor relationship, like it was a necessity to commerce. So it was very much around, I want to sell my products. I want to reach customers. Oh, and I have to have a payment provider. And it would typically be very aligned with, I would say, like incumbent banks, probably where you might have some business relationships. And they would do an element of payment processing. And I think more and more as time has gone on, and I would say sophistication has entered the payment space and complexity as well, there's a lot more that's needed out of payments. And I think there's a realization of, the power of increasing your acceptance rates, of creating a nice customer experience for your consumers. So again, if it's clunky and difficult to buy something, you might have the best products, but if people can't then purchase at the end of it, it can lead to them going to a competitor or going elsewhere. So I think more and more it's been seen as something that's a business differentiator and an enabler of increasing their business. So really looking at kind of merchants is I would say that sophistication and merchants hiring payment companies, payment teams, sorry. So they're actually going in and saying, okay, I want people who are experts in payments who can help us build a strategy around payments, whether that's around geographies they want to go into, whether it's about payment methods they want to accept. And then obviously really, really importantly is about optimization, whether that's around cost or whether that's around increasing acceptance rates. So I think we're seeing across almost every industry, there's much more of a focus of how can you partner with your payments companies to understand how to get the most out of it, how to power your payments. And that really has been like the shift, I would say, particularly in the last 3 to 5 years.
Awesome. There's so much to unpack there. So maybe as a starting point, you talked around you're seeing payments teams being hired more. Is that like a very big shift that you've seen? Like maybe called it 5-10 years ago, who was the persona you were discussing with, or how big was the payments team, and what are you seeing now in some of the world's leading brands that you get to work with?
Yes, it's a good question. I think there's the buying cycle is very different. Like in the past, when I first started working, actually when I first worked, I used to do tech pre-sale, so I'd go out with the BDs and to help sell products. Typically, the buying decision sat with the finance department, and still does in some merchants, and of course that's a key part of it. Whereas now you're also selling to developers, right, to the CTOs and to developers to make sure they understand what your tech stack looks like and they're comfortable with the integration. So I think there's a big change in that space. But when it comes to, I would say, payments expertise, it's because historically, I think there was a real reliance on the payment service provider to do everything for them and kind of lead in that way, or would kind of go in blindly and say, okay, I need payments. I'm going to go to my incumbent bank who gives me other services, and that would just be what I do. Whereas now they realize that there's so much more you can get out of it, which means that they need to have people who can engage with payment experts, with the payment service providers they work with, to kind of get the most out of it and understand what they're doing. So it's really, really kind of showing, and I would say some industries have had, I would say, more tech savvy or kind of payments focused people, but it's certainly changed where every industry now has that, and it wasn't the case a few years ago.
Interesting. I have to say, I think one of the things I've also noticed when I get to speak to the merchants that we work with is also feels like there's been a dissemination of talent. Like everyone used to work at MasterCard and Visa or has some experience there, and then they go and move on, and it feels like there's more kind of expertise in the market, whereas maybe 10 years ago there was less payment companies or payment companies had lower employee count, but now everyone's kind of looked to progress their career, and there's actually been a distribution of people that have maybe been at the PSP side and now work in-house.
Yes,
at a merchant side. Is that something you see as well?
No, 100%. I think, again, there's a lot more companies out there as well. There's a lot more areas of, I would say, companies that kind of specialize in certain areas as well. So you've got I would say, your large payment employee companies, right? Is your Visas, your MasterCards, your WorldPays, like whoever it would be. And what you would typically see is people have been in all different areas of payments, right? They might have been on the merchant side, right, working in a payments team. They could have been with a scheme and a network. They could have worked with a payment company, and maybe now they're in a scale up business or something that's either specializing in a certain area or looking more generally at payments. So I do think it's a small world. We as well, like if you go to a payments event, it's a reunion as well as going there to meet partners, because you'll see people that you either used to work with in a previous company or someone who used to work with you that's now somewhere else. So it definitely feels that there's a lot of expertise across the organization, across the industry, that is great to see, right? I think ultimately that's the biggest benefit for merchants, is there's a lot of people who are passionate about payments. I think the only people who are passionate about payments are people generally in payments, but it's definitely something that's really great to see.
That's awesome. I was in the US a couple of weeks ago, and we met a ticketing platform just to kind of understand like how they think about payments. And the individual had like worked at PSP for like 15 years in product, and then like he's gone into a merchant, and it was like awesome to kind of hear his experience, because he was like, it's great to be on the other side of the table.
I definitely think, yeah. I mean, it's that thing of knowing what it's like being on the other side, right? And I think as well, if you have someone who joins, from a merchant into a company like Worldpay, especially if they've worked with Worldpay, they know all the great things, but they know the pain points. They know the things in that customer experience journey. They mean that you can continually learn and improve and iterate your products. So I think being able to share that information and share knowledge is key to continuing to make sure we're challenging ourselves to innovate and to improve and to make things easier.
Makes sense. And you mentioned earlier around like some of the other changes that you've seen over the last few years, like maybe a bit more of a focus on performance optimization. Is that something that you're seeing? Obviously, you lead the like enterprise function, so obviously that's where a lot of your time, I assume, is spent. But are you also seeing that trend with maybe like kind of smaller companies like mid-market SMBs, or do you think this is something that now enterprises more specifically are focusing on?
So I think it's always been a focus of enterprise customers to get the most, right? Whether that's optimizing costs or optimizing performance. But generally in the past, it was more complicated to do. There would be more work required on the merchant side. And through the process of trying to actually, I would say, reduce the burden on enterprise customers to get the best acceptance rates through the data that we have, to understand how a transaction flows and what's the best way to get an acceptance rate with an issuer. You step to get to a point that this actually becomes very beneficial for smaller merchants who everyone wants to have a good experience and to have the best acceptance rate, but it's about how much of a lift that is to be able to achieve it. So I think as it has started with a very enterprise focus, right? How do I route transactions? Like you can look at like debit routing in the US, where you can go through the ATM networks and the debit networks, and that can give you a cost benefit and sometimes an acceptance benefit versus leveraging network payment tokenization and other factors to understand how to get the best out of it. As you build those services and you get more sophisticated, you can kind of almost make them an out-the-box product, which means you can kind of, in some cases, have a turnkey product that could work across your entire estate that's actually benefiting merchants of every size. So I definitely think it's expanding beyond what was historically seen as more of a focus in the enterprise space, because they can actually be leveraged across the board.
Gotcha. So like that lower barrier to entry and like accessibility to the stuff that maybe they dreamed of, but the barriers may be too high. But now with like new technology and like improvements there, like why can't they go and like optimize for all three, even if you're maybe not processing over $1 billion, where maybe in the past that's kind of
exactly
the luxury that you used to have.
Exactly right. I think again, the more you can reduce the burden on companies and make payments as easy as possible, it's the more likely you can get the best performance for everyone. So it's very much about understanding the data you can use and the products you can use to kind of get the most out of it, and then how do you make them as easy as possible to use, if not just simply, as I said, a turnkey product. It works in the background, and then you've got metrics to show what it's doing for you, right? What does that having it on, what's the benefit that it's brought you, right? And you can do that at businesses of any size.
Nice, like talking to like almost like a flywheel effect, right? Like you try something, you can see it straight away. Maybe in the past you didn't have that kind of reinforcement. That's a nice idea. And then, I mean, one thing I've also noticed and thought a lot about is it feels like companies are growing faster. And so, I was reading an article the other day, and like, Lovable and all these AI companies are going like 0 to 100 million in like 12 or 24 months, which is like crazy growth. Do you also think there's also an element of like future proofing growth? Whereas maybe in the past you weren't maybe growing as fast. Whereas now, because you're growing so fast, actually, if you don't fix this problem now, you're not going to be able to kind of maybe compete with some of your competitors. Like, is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think when you look at some areas, that there's obviously explosive growth in areas like agentic commerce and AI. So there's lots of companies out there. They're all trying to solve similar or the same problems across the ecosystem. Just from how you use AI in different tools and products to agentic commerce, allowing customers to almost have autonomous flows that exist today. I think ultimately everything is extremely fast moving, so you have to be able to fail fast and move forward and make sure you're building something that works for the merchants. I think your biggest challenge, as we see with any of this, and we've seen this in the past in other, I would say, fast growing parts of the payments industry, is there will be some level of potential consolidation and understanding of kind of what wins out overall, right, in terms of that. So I think a lot of it's really around there has to be the pace of change is changing, right? I think in the last 5 years, more's happened in the last 20 years, and I'm sure we'll be saying a similar thing in a few years' time. It really is becoming almost more complicated every year, and I think the ability to try and demystify that and simplify it is what people are looking for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a nice segue to my next question then. So what do you think are the things that payment managers should be thinking about? Like, what would your advice and guidance be if you're going to sit across the table from maybe an enterprise merchant?
I think with an enterprise merchant, it'll be understanding their business, what it is they're like selling, what markets they operate in, and understand what's important to them. And I would say as well, it's also firstly understanding from a client and a merchant, like what are those pain points you have? Is it in the payment flow? Is it actually in back end processing when it comes to defending disputes? Or so there's a whole multitude when you think about the end-to-end life cycle of a payment. It could also be my pay from a payment side, but how do I then pay out my suppliers, my third parties, myself? So there's many aspects that go into that, but typically it would be understanding where they operate and how they operate to then put together a proposition that works for them, which is thinking around, okay, well, what's the easiest way in which to set up payment acceptance? What's the right payment method mix that should be made available? So what payment products are your consumers going to want to use? If you're operating domestically in Germany or in France to the UK, there's going to be different payment methods that are going to be prevalent there. So understanding that piece. As always, there's more and more focus on how we can make sure there's, that we're stopping fraud in especially in a card not present space. So are they using a fraud provider already? Do they need to get fraud provisions from us? So how can we make sure we can secure those transactions and making sure we're letting as many of the good transactions through, but stopping those bad transactions? And then outside of that would be making sure they understand how to, I would say, financially and operationally run their business when using a payment provider. It's really kind of not just about saying, hey, we've got the products that work for you. It's here's how you integrate them. Here's how they will give you beneficial, the benefits of turning these on, and this is how easy it will be for your teams to operate with us. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a multitude that comes into it.
And that was like I think a very good summary of like how complicated payments can be if you actually start digging into stuff, right? And we always talk about like the payment journey and the different nodes on it, which I think you summarized really well. Like, how should I even reason about like prioritization? Like you just listed a lot of things. Like
that's true.
How am I meant to like understand around like, well, does this need improving? Like what's a good benchmark? But equally like, should I invest time into this first or maybe another node in that journey?
Yeah. I mean, at Worldpay, a lot of it, especially in the enterprise space, is you've got account teams that are dedicated there to support you. And there will then be people that can come in and say like, how are things performing for you, whether that's at a quarterly business review or in kind of ad hoc meetings, which is, you set yourself up, you're taking payments. What does that actually mean? What are you seeing? Where are you seeing good performance? Where are you potentially seeing performance that could be improved? And essentially then utilizing the data to then say, okay, well, we're seeing trends here where potentially it could be simple things like you're not doing 3DS in this market, but actually it's kind of preferred, and therefore you should be thinking about that. And even on you can then use that data to create services that don't even mean that they have to do that. So we have a product called the Authentication Optimization Service, and what it does is where there's a non-mandated market, does something do or not do? Does an issuer like or not like 3DS? So it allows that to be something we do to kind of make sure we're getting the most performance. So I think it's really about getting yourself set up, making sure that you're focusing on kind of your core markets and the payments that you need, and then it's about iterating those over time. And the most important thing behind that is the data. As you see traffic come through, as you understand what's happening, you can see where those little tweaks can be made to get the most out of it.
I think that's absolutely something I see as well. It's almost like an experimentation framework required in order to kind of optimize. I always say, like, to the team that I work with, is like payments is empirical. Like, you always have to like learn by doing sometimes, rather than like reading a book and now I know payments super well.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that you'll say, okay, we've built something a certain way. Even just take like card acquiring. This is how you should send a message. This is how you should receive a message. But then issuer behavior is not formulaic. It's not all the same. So something that works with one issuer might not work with another issuer. We've seen this with lots of new things coming into the ecosystem. So let's just take network payment tokenization. Now, obviously, everyone says that and the schemes want that to be used ubiquitously, like all the time, but not all issuers fully participate or respond to network token requests. So, even though there's I would say an industry understanding of the way something should be, doesn't mean that that's always how it works in practice. So the reality is the expertise of a payment service provider to help you understand that is key to making sure you get the most out of your performance. And there's many cases. So especially if you talk to a customer who's in many countries all over the world, their experience is going to be fundamentally different. And an acceptance rate in an emerging market is not going to be the same as your acceptance rate in the UK with cards. It just won't be. But then as long as you understand that and what the benchmarks are, you can actually understand whether it is good or not good performance. Sometimes if you take a single view, and which can happen, you're not necessarily going to get to a point that you truly understand how your performance is based on what you're offering, what market you're offering it in. So I think it's really key. Again, data backs that up, right?
Yeah, well, I have a maths degree. I love data. So as a merchant, like, how should I put this into practice? Like, do I need to build an experimentation framework, like be able to like quickly turn things on and off, like normalize my data so I can visualize it? Or like, is this something I should maybe, like, that's a service that like almost you provide and like other third parties provide? Like, how should I think about that as a merchant?
Personally, I think you will always find some merchants will want to do it themselves, but I'm talking about the largest global MNCs that want to have complete autonomy. So they will have teams building and using their data to optimize transactions. They A/B test. They do all these sorts of things. In reality, that's not something that is a luxury that every merchant can do. So my opinion and how we operate as well is that we want to try and reduce that burden on merchants, which is how can we give you the data, the understanding, and the expertise to know how to get the most out of your payments. But you'll always have a mixture, I think, where there will be some stuff that a merchant will want to do themselves versus allowing a payment service provider to, help them route traffic, help them understand, what to do and not to do. And that's really what the importance of a good payment service provider is, right? They're a partner. They're not a vendor. They're a partner that's helping you navigate that. And, ultimately, a merchant's success is the PSP success, right? It's mutually exclusive in terms of that, right? You have to work together, and it's beneficial for both parties. And for the consumer at the end of the day, right, it means that they can buy the product they want to buy. They have an experience that's nice, and they feel that they've been, supported through that journey.
I think that's such a lovely way of phrasing it. Like, our CEO, actually, Gab, says the exact same thing that you just said. So he'll love that, which is like, our merchant success is our success. I think you just said the same, right? Yeah. So I think I've certainly noticed that you build products better that way because you're also more intimate with like the problem set, rather than like, oh, we're going to build a set of features and like hope they solve your problem. Like, if you're very deeply coupled, then I always find that you're building a better solution.
Yeah, our vision is about enabling the merchant's success, which means that in turn it enables our success. And as you said, you can sometimes get into board when you're building products that, especially once they've been in market for a while and you've been running them, is these are the things I want to do. But then you need to take a step back and go, well, these are things that our customers want us to do. Have we got our priorities right? Have we got our thought process right? So again, in anything within product development, it's going to the users of that product and saying, is this what you want? Will you like this? Would you buy this product, or would you consume this product if it was available? So the consumer has, the merchant, the customer has to be at the heart of everything we do.
And you talked around like some opportunities to optimize some things. And you talked around like in regions where 3DS isn't mandated, there's some opportunities there. Is there any kind of other low-hanging fruit that usually is like when you sit down with the merchant, okay, well, like we know that these 5 or 3 things, usually there's some low-hanging fruit, or is it actually like very custom based on that merchant?
I think some of it can be very custom because it will sometimes come down to like the exact message you should be sending to a particular issuer or to a scheme or via an acquirer. So I do think there's some complex needs there that you need to dig into. But typically as well, there's a lot of stuff just in your common optimization that we've been doing for years, which is look at the payment page. Is your payment page easy to navigate? Have you solved for all of the happy paths and the unhappy paths? Even simple things like you've put an Amex card in, it's 4 digits on the front of the card for your security code, not 3 on the back. Like, and it seems sometimes funny to say those things, but like these generally do accept acceptance rates, and you do see it more often than you'd think you would. So I think all of that stuff needs to be brought in. So I think there's definitely low hanging fruit, which would be, as I said, understanding 3DS or no 3DS, or does a merchant, does an issuer like or not like prefer a network token versus a full PAN? Again, these are things that could be done by the payment service provider on behalf of the merchant. It even comes down to things where like how you send AVS information, right? Address verification. Like, should you send? In some cases, in the past, it was like, don't send it because it actually would, for some reason, give you a worse acceptance rate. So you do have to dig into the data. I don't think it's always like, but there are those basic things, which is just like your customer experience, and then there's that, I would say, the underlying messaging and formatting that someone with years of experience in the industry can look at that and say, okay, these are the tweaks that can be made. And ideally, those tweaks, as I said, is once they're made autonomous via a tool. It means you don't have to worry about it, or you don't have to like react after seeing poor performance. It's being solved, in real time, which is ultimately the goal that I think everyone in the industry wants, which is getting the most without having to do manual intervention.
Yeah, it's funny you talked about AVS. Like, I heard some wild story around like a PSP building like a payment optimization, and like they found like huge efficiencies and like tweaking the string formatting on like the address. And just like sometimes it's like reducing spaces or something like this made a huge difference. Maybe an interesting question for you, no pressure. But like, do you have an example of like a very surprising optimization tweak that you saw that led to like a weird outperformed kind of increase in performance?
I think some of the strange things are exactly that. It's like the content you send in the address fields can fundamentally change like your acceptance. There's lots of different things like that where you wouldn't expect that to have an impact. So I think those are probably like the key things that are obvious in terms of having like a material impact where you wouldn't necessarily think they would do.
That makes sense. Cool. All right. Last question then, or last topic. What are the kind of upcoming trends that you're focusing on right now? Like, what's keeping you busy? Where do you see kind of some exciting opportunities?
Yeah, I think we always have like core priorities that we're driving towards, and payment performance is absolutely one of them, right? You have to have a stable, performant, compliant platform that works, and also ensuring that we're investing in our value add services. So, and really what I mean by that is things that are beneficial to the end to end, right? Again, whether it's acceptance rates, cost, etc. I would be remiss to not talk about the 2 hottest topics that exist in the payments industry. Again, if you go on LinkedIn, it's often all you see, right? It's I would say it's the stablecoin growth of stablecoin, and particularly talking about like the fiat sandwich and kind of how that can help and have an addition to traditional rails for payments.
Could you maybe unpack that for like the listeners?
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, in the past, if you wanted to make a payment, especially when you're talking about doing a payout, you would be paying to a bank account, and you could be using the Swift rails or a domestic clearinghouse, and it's traditional banking rails. And then over the years, things have actually grown and changed, right? With that, which is you can now push to card, right? So you can use like Visa Direct to Mastercard Send and other products to push funds. It's still ultimately to an underlying bank account, but is using a different kind of mechanism to do that. And you'll see in other markets where wallets are more prevalent, you can do a push to a wallet, right? So I want my money to be deposited in the wallet that I use on a day-to-day basis. And I think as cryptocurrency and the underlying technology has kind of grown and sophisticated, and become more sophisticated, the interest has really peaked as kind of stablecoin has come into circulation, and people are looking at it more and more as an additional channel to the traditional rails. It's not going to. I think sometimes you'll see analysts say it's completely going to replace, traditional banking rails. I don't. That's not the case, and I don't think really that's where it's going. I think ultimately there are going to always be certain corridors where you might be needing to pay transactions, or in currencies where there's volatility in the foreign exchange, that you would be looking to leverage stablecoins to do near real time, like immediate payouts that are low cost and allow you to get into some of those corridors that are more challenging. So I see it as something that's just I would say another tool, or an arrow in the quiver, as some people say, into how you can get your money across the world. So really, that's what we see as kind of the biggest thing. And again, there's also a place for, I guess, the stablecoin at the moment, very much in the settlement space as well. As I want to receive my settlement in in USDC, and then take it from there. So I think those have been like the biggest, I would say, areas where we've seen growth or interest.
And is that theoretical, or like are you actually seeing it in the wild
it
having
exists,
an impact?
It happens. I think there are companies out there obviously playing in the space as well. We offer settlement via stablecoin. We're also doing remittance via stablecoin, adding to the other three I mentioned before. So it's there's demand for it, because it solves a very real problem. Again, if you can get money to a country where previously it would have gone through multiple banks and had a certain amount of money taken from it as part of those transfer fees, and you can do it actually in near real time at a much cheaper rate, then there's a business case there. So it exists, and I think it will continue to be something that's going to become more and more important. But yeah, it's real, it's there. It's not so much a theoretical piece. It's more about how you bring that into the wider offerings that you have as a complementary asset.
And if I'm a merchant, like, how should I reason about it? Like, should I go and speak to my PSP as soon as I've heard you say that and go and get set up? Like,
the question comes down to whether you have a business need for it, right? I think if you don't have a business need for receiving money in stablecoin or being able to remit money in a stablecoin, then it's not necessarily something you need to worry about. But if you're a business that does transactions or has business all over the world, it may be something that's of interest. And again, if you've got a payment provider that provides payouts and remittance, it's worth a conversation.
Awesome. Okay, so that's big topic number one.
Yeah.
What's big topic?
Obviously,
I think I know, but
yeah. Can you guess? All bets on agentic commerce, right?
Yeah.
So, when you think about agentic commerce, I think there's lots of different ideas behind this. Like, in reality, there are flavors of this that exist and have existed for a while, right? It's a chatbot helping you within the buying process, taking you up to the point of payment, but then handing off to a human. And I think the next stage is this notion of how do you get to autonomous payments, where an agent is acting on behalf of a consumer, but has got the permission and intent to then actually make the transaction for you without you being present. Think of, I want to buy a ticket to see Oasis, price point, I'm willing to pay up to this amount. Can you go and find it from one of the sites for me, right? So things to that to, again, I want to do my weekly shop and change things. So there's loads of different use cases in which it can come into play. And really what we see this as is it's going to become a new channel to support. So again, as a payment service provider, you generally say, I want to accept payments from some or all channels, be that point of sale, e-commerce, and now actually agentic is really a different channel, because although it, in the world today, it's in the e-com environment, it is a very different experience. Not just for the consumer. There's now agents involved. It changes the relationship between the consumer and the merchant. So again, having an understanding of trusted agents, having an understanding of the intent of the shopper, so that there are frameworks that work end to end, so you can take a payment and trust that it's legitimate, right? There's been years spent trying to stop bad bots online from defrauding companies. Now we've got this notion of trusted agents, which are essentially bots at the end of the day. So how do you build that and make it a channel that works, because consumers are looking to use it more and more, and make sure that it works for everyone in the ecosystem. Because again, we need to make sure those transactions are not susceptible to fraud or misuse. We need to make sure that there's trust between all the different parties, as there'll be new parties entering the kind of essentially the commerce landscape. So really, it's about trying to do that. And I think with agentic commerce, it's quite evident already that there's a few different protocols in play. There's different players that want to do different aspects of the ecosystem. So, as a company, you have to take it as a big bet and be prepared to like fail fast and test and understand, because some of those things may not be around, the whole time, right? It depends on adoption. So I think there's going to be a case of understanding how this evolves over time.
I was going to ask you actually I think you talked exactly to the fragmentation. It doesn't really feel like there's a unified standard. It feels like, I know every time I go on LinkedIn, there's a new kind of acronym for a new protocol.
Yes.
How should I think about that as a merchant, right? It's like super overwhelming. Like we talked around like our merchant success is our success.
Yeah.
Like I'm not entirely sure that ethos has absolutely been followed with all of these protocols, because I certainly speak to merchants who are like massively overwhelmed. So like what advice would you have for any merchant trying to navigate this?
I think you actually can see this kind of fragmentation in many periods of time in the payments landscape. Even to the extent, if you take like when 3DS first became a thing, it's common for frameworks and protocols, but they're all slightly different. So if you have to integrate to every single one of them, they're slightly different in how they look and feel, but you're trying to get the same outcome. And ultimately, for a merchant, you want to have someone who can demystify and do this on behalf of. So really being able to say, well, there may be 3 protocols that you have to go to. There may be, a number of different things that you might need to do, but how can you make that as simple as possible, that irrespective of what potentially the agents you're using, the protocols that a merchant's engaging with, and downstream, that you're able to still do that and have it as a meaningful channel to reach your consumers. So I think it's really a case of, trying to do it all on your own would be expensive. It would be costly. I think the intent here is as an industry, we need to solve for a way that it's not going to create huge complexity, cost, and challenge for the merchants, right? Because ultimately we're there to allow consumers buy from merchants' websites. Making it impossibly hard or impossibly expensive is not going to be meaningful. So I think the end goal is to make it is to try and simplify or hide that complexity. Because at the end of the day, we already have this in the payments landscape. There are different protocols look at open banking. There's not one single scheme across the globe, right? There's several, and they are slightly different, and banks implement them slightly differently. So it's another example where payments can be complex because you've got multiple parties trying to solve for a common problem, and they've all got a right to try and do that. But it does mean that you sometimes get this fragmentation where you have to try and navigate that. And I think a payment service provider is someone who should be there to help with that space.
I'd say one of my biggest concern is I think 3DS is a good analogy. My concern is around there's lots of players now that want to own the standard. So before it was just like the card networks had a lot of the authority. They could go and define the standard. EMV code can create the spec. Great, cool. Then there's obviously implementation and enforcement, but at least there's an alignment on who owns the standard.
Yeah.
I guess with this, it's different in the sense that you now have these AI companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, who now have a lot of the power because they own the interface and they're trying to define a standard. But then you also have the card networks coming out and defining standards as well. So how do you see this playing out? Like, who's going to win? Do you have a hot take?
It's hard, right? I think it will come down at the end of the day to consumer adoption, right? Which will be, or also ones that are already proliferated across the ecosystem that could be in a good place. The reality is, and one of the goals that we're trying to do at Worldpay is saying, okay, there are lots of players. Everyone's keen to do a bit of like KYA, right? Know your agent. Like, how can I make sure this is a trusted agent? From traditional KYB, KYC players to the schemes, to maybe the banks want to do it. Like, so there's lots of different things where that comes into play. And I think one of our things is to try and, I would say, help influence the industry to make sure that we get it as standardized as possible. And again, try and not make this too overly complex for the merchant at the end of the day. but I think there's a lot to work through there. I definitely think there's not going to be one single protocol, one single thing. I do think there will be a few that will exist, and they will work as part of an end-to-end solution. And again, like with lots of industries or things that happen in this industry, there'll be like lots of companies kind of growing. There'll be lots of people doing this space, and at some point there'll probably be some level of consolidation and simplification, so that it becomes kind of a bit more, I would say, stable in terms of what are the things I need to understand and do in order to proceed. But I think there's a lot of work across different bodies and with these with the company, the agentic companies, to say, how can we make sure this isn't too wildly different, that has commonality. And I think there's a lot of common themes, right? It's around, as I said, the kind of know your agent. It's around shopper intent, so having that trust and that kind of authority to do something, and then making sure that your fraud engines are trained, your LLMs are retrained on how to understand, trusted versus, potentially nefarious, agentic or bots on your website.
It's going to be an exciting few years, I think, navigating all of this.
So.
Awesome. Well, that's an amazing place to leave it. James, thanks so much for your time. It's been great speaking.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you again to James for joining this episode of Payments Unfiltered. If you enjoyed the episode, there are many more conversations with other people working in the payments industry. Please go to YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to go check them out. And I'll see you next time.